What happens when a quiet naval commander is publicly humiliated by an admiral during a critical network outage? You won't believe how a ripped uniform sleeve reveals a secret that will upend the entire naval command system. Before we continue, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your opinion inspires us to do better. The morning began with Commander Jacob Murphy delivering a box of 12 puppies to the animal shelter. His daughter cried the entire way. Their dog had given birth to a litter, and keeping such a flock in their small apartment was impossible. He set the box down on the porch and, frowning, said to a volunteer, "Find them good homes. They're good babies." His voice was hoarse but firm. He wasn't one for sentimentality, but the way he gently petted each puppy before leaving was filled with genuine tenderness. 3 hours later, his life fell apart. The Fleet Global Command Operations Center at Pearson Bay hummed with the low hum of air conditioners and server fans, a sound that penetrated the bones. The atmosphere was cold, sterile, designed to keep emotions as controlled as the air temperature. Blue icons of friendly naval units flickered on the central holographic display. A swarm of red icons, polymorphic and aggressive, breached their network defenses not by brute force, but with sophisticated parasitic code masquerading as its own identification protocols. It was a digital ghost, and it was winning. Rear Admiral Victor Landsail, his face a crimson mask of fury, stood on the command dais. He was a man built for peacetime parades and congressional hearings. His uniform was impeccable, his voice a theatrical baritone that filled any room. Now that voice crackled with rage. His pet project, the latest generation shield system, which he had personally pushed through the purchasing committee, was crumbling before his eyes. "Get it all back! Get it back now!" he barked, his voice cutting through the concentrated whispers of the operators. His gaze darted across the rows of technicians, their faces illuminated by the frantic scrolling of code on their monitors. He was looking for a target, a neck to plant his boot on. His gaze fell on Commander Jacob Murphy. He stood motionless at the command, communications, computer, and intelligence information console. His posture was perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Murphy was a short, middle-aged man, easily overlooked, and his silence in the midst of the Admiral's storm seemed an unforgivable act of defiance. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't even typing. He simply stared at the cascade of corrupted data, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a distant melody. "You!" Landsail's voice was a physical blow. He pointed a finger at Murphy. "Commander Murphy, you are the senior signals intelligence officer on this watch. This is your failure. Your department assured me this network was impenetrable." Murphy's gaze shifted from the panel to the Admiral. His eyes were calm, a neutral gray. "Admiral, the report I submitted on May 14th detailed exactly this vulnerability. The polymorphic signature was a theoretical possibility. We requested a full diagnostic isolation. The request was denied." His voice was quiet, without intonation, a simple statement of facts. The mention of the report, which Landsail had personally dismissed as alarmist paranoia, sent a fresh wave of fire through the Admiral's veins. It was one thing to fail. It was quite another to be reminded of it so clinically, so publicly. He stepped down from the dais, his polished shoes clanging loudly on the composite floor. The operators flinched as he passed, their concentration broken. "A theoretical possibility?" he smirked, stepping close enough for Murphy to feel the heat radiating off him. "That's not a theory, Commander. We're blind. We've lost contact with Task Force Sierra. That's on you. You should have had a backup plan." "The backup plan was isolation, Admiral," Murphy replied, his voice unwavering. "Protocol dictates—" "Protocol!" Landsail was shouting now, his face inches from Murphy's. "I'm the Admiral here. I'm protocol." "You and your files and your endless cowardly procedures. Do you know what you are, Commander? You're a box-ticking officer. You file reports to cover your ass when the real world happens. You have no instinct, no fire." He was losing control, and some part of him knew it. But his rage was a runaway train. He needed to break Murphy. He needed to see fear, or tears, or anything but that unflappable, irritating calm. "You're driving me crazy!" He roared, the words echoing in the terrible silence of the operations center. His hands shot forward. He hadn't meant to strike, not exactly. But the impulse was faster than his reason. He grabbed the fabric of Murphy's uniform sleeve, the crisp sea blue of his work jacket, and yanked, intending to physically shake the commander, to force him to react. The sound of tearing fabric was shockingly loud in the quiet room. A long, ragged tear appeared, ripping the material from shoulder to elbow. The jacket sleeve burst open, and then everyone, including Admiral Landsail, froze. There on the pale, bare skin of his forearm was a tattoo. It wasn't a simple sailor's anchor or a sentimental inscription. It was a clear, black emblem. A phoenix. Its wings spread wide, it rose from a bed of stylized flames. But it was no ordinary phoenix. Its head was tilted, its eye a piercing black dot, and in its talons it clutched not a branch, but a broken radio antenna. Below, in a stark block font, were 2 words in Latin: Fides in antennaes, faith in antennas. Landsail stared, his hands still clutching the torn piece of fabric hanging limply at his side. The emblem was unfamiliar, but it radiated a deadly power. This wasn't a cheap tattoo parlor design. This was a symbol, precise and intentional. The room, already quiet, felt as if the very air had been drained from it. The operators no longer looked at the collapsing network. They looked at the tattoo. Commander Murphy didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He didn't even glance at the torn sleeve. His calm gray eyes remained fixed on Admiral Landsail's face. He watched as the crimson rage drained from him, replaced by a wave of confusion, and then a flicker of something the Admiral hadn't felt in decades. Uncertainty. Murphy paused for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached out and carefully pulled the ragged edges of his sleeve together, hiding the emblem from view. He didn't resort to violence or the Admiral's outburst. "Lieutenant Collins," he said, his voice clear and crisp, cutting through the thick silence. His gaze shifted to the young officer hunched over the console. "Please log 1 unit of service-issue uniform jacket as damaged during active operations. Record the time of the event on the main security feed. Angle 47. Lieutenant Collins, a lanky officer who always seemed subdued, looked from Murphy to the Admiral, his mouth slightly open. He nodded numbly, his fingers clumsily tapping the keyboard. Murphy then turned back to the Admiral. He gave a short, polite nod, a gesture of procedural acknowledgement, not deference. "With your permission, Admiral, I will now leave and prepare a full report on the follow-up to the network failure." He didn't wait for permission. He turned and walked away, unhurried, without anger, simply gone. His steps were almost silent as he left the operations center, leaving behind a room full of stunned witnesses, a torn piece of fabric on the floor, and the Admiral, who suddenly, horrifyingly, realized he had just torn the curtain off something he didn't understand at all. The red icons on the holographic map continued their silent, inexorable advance. In his cabin, the silence was a welcome relief. The space was Spartan, clinical. 1 bunk, a small table, a locked storage compartment. There were no personal photographs, no souvenirs. His life was contained within regulations and encrypted equipment. Murphy laid the damaged jacket on the bunk, the tear a gaping wound in the dark blue fabric. He ran 1 finger along its edge for a moment, the touch light, analytical. He didn't curse the Admiral. He didn't dwell on the humiliation. Emotions were variables, and his job was to eliminate variables. The incident was now a data point. He sat down at his desk and turned on his secure laptop, its case scuffed and utilitarian. He bypassed the ship's main network, connecting to a secure closed-loop server via a wired port. He opened a new file, the cursor blinking in the void. His report was terse, clinical. Incident report. Date, October 22nd. Time, 1437 Zulu. Location, GCKO. Subject, verbal altercation and destruction of government property. Parties, Rear Admiral Victor Landsail, Commander Jacob Murphy. Summary. During a Level 3 network intrusion, Rear Admiral Landsail engaged in a verbal altercation with Commander Murphy, culminating in the deliberate destruction of Commander Murphy's uniform jacket. Event recorded on internal security camera tape. Camera 47 Charlie. He downloaded a still image he'd quietly extracted from the camera feed before leaving the operations center. It was a high-angle shot, grainy but clear. It showed the Admiral's hand clutching his sleeve, his face contorted. It showed his own absolute stillness. Proof. Chain of custody. He encrypted the file and uploaded it to a secure digital vault, a location so deep in the naval intelligence architecture that verifying its existence required 3 separate dynamic authentications. The file was now a mine waiting to be uncovered. Having finished with the documentation, he turned to a practical problem. He pulled a small, nondescript sewing kit from a drawer. Inside, among spools of nautical thread and steel needles, was a small, flat spool of something else. It looked like a dark metallic thread, almost like spun wire. It was microfilament repair braid, a material used to repair tears in test samples of camouflage fabric. It was stronger than the original fabric. He sat on the edge of the bunk, his jacket over his knees. With precise, economical movements, he began to stitch up the tear. His fingers worked with surgical confidence. Every stitch was perfect. It was a meditative, focusing act. The frantic energy of the operations center, the Admiral's hot breath, the shock on the crew's faces, all of it vanished, replaced by a simple, physical task. Stitch, draw, knot, restore shape, recalibrate. Even as he worked, his mind was already processing the network failure. The Admiral saw chaos. He saw a pattern. The parasitic code wasn't random, it was too elegant. It exploited the network's own load-balancing protocols to replicate, turning every attempt to isolate it into a trigger for faster spread. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. His rejected report had hypothesized as much, even suggesting a specific polymorphic, frequency-hopping signature the code would likely exploit. The Admiral dismissed it as academic. Now Task Force Sierra was paying the price for the Admiral's lack of academic curiosity. He finished the last stitch. The repair was a thin, dark, barely noticeable scar on the inside of the sleeve. On the outside, it was almost perfect. He lifted the jacket, inspecting his work. Satisfied, he folded it neatly and set it aside. His preparation wasn't revenge. It was order. The Admiral had introduced a chaotic element into the system. He documented it. Now he would prepare to correct a larger, more critical failure. He opened the laptop again, but this time he didn't consult the report. He accessed the raw data stream from the affected network, a stream of corrupted packets that he'd mirrored to a private partition before leaving. The Admiral saw the noise. He began displaying the signal. 2 days later, the formal accusation was delivered to him by a grim chief petty officer. It was formal, cold, and brutal. Admiral Lansale, unable to stomach the quiet insubordination and whispers that now haunted him, escalated the situation. He couldn't punish Murphy for being right, so he would punish him for his own failure, reframing it as Murphy's negligence. A document issued by the Office of the Military Advocate General accused Commander Jacob Murphy of gross negligence and dereliction of duty, leading to a critical compromise of the command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence, architecture, and endangering naval assets. The document cited his failure to implement effective countermeasures and, in a particularly poisonous twist, his insubordinate refusal to dynamically engage with the crisis as it unfolded. The Admiral transformed his composure into inaction, his precision into paralysis. His immediate superior, Captain Evans, stood in the doorway as Murphy read the document. Evans was a career surface naval officer, a man who understood ships, weather, and the brutal mathematics of combat. He was also a man who trusted his men. "It's career-ending, Jacob," he said, his voice low. "He wants a full Article 32 hearing. He wants a court-martial." Murphy finished reading the document, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. "He's overreacting," Murphy said, his voice free of alarm. "Maybe," Evans agreed. "But he's an admiral." The commission will be made up of his colleagues. They protect their own. His theory is that you froze. He'll have half the watch from the operations center intimidated into backing his play. They want to save their careers too. The data doesn't support his story, Murphy said simply. He gestured to his secure laptop. The raw packet stream tells a different story. Can you prove it? Can you make it make sense to a committee of aviators and naval officers who consider signals intelligence black magic? For the first time, something other than calm neutrality flickered across Murphy's face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was focus. Cold, hard, crystalline focus. I can, he said, but it will be more effective to demonstrate it. Evans looked at him, then at the formal charge sheet. He'd seen his work before. He'd sponsored his transfer to his unit based on a recommendation from a source so high up it had no name, only a symbol. He'd always suspected there was more to Murphy than the quiet officer who filed flawless reports. What do you need? He asked. Unlimited access to the war game simulation room and the attack data set. I also need Lieutenant Collins. He saw the Admiral's initial reaction. He's a reliable witness to emotional states. Evans hesitated for a second. This was a direct challenge to the flagship. It was a risk to his career and to himself. But then he remembered the expression on Murphy's face in the operations center. That unflappable calm. This wasn't the face of an incompetent. This was the face of a man 5 steps ahead. Get it, he said. Show them what you see. The provocation was now formal. The commission was convened. Admiral Lansale built his case, painting a picture of a timid, bookish officer who had choked under pressure. He was confident. He had the rank, the narrative, and a gallery of junior officers who would nod obediently when asked if their commander had seemed paralyzed. The stage was set for his professional execution. The war game simulation room was a smaller version of the main operations center. A cold, dark space dominated by a circular screen and a central holographic projector. Admiral Lansale was there with 3 captains, the investigating committee. Captain Evans stood in the background, a silent observer. Commander Murphy stood next to the main console, Lieutenant Collins, pale and nervous, next to him. Commander Murphy, began the presiding captain, a stern aviator named Jennings. Admiral Lansale claims you failed to act during the recent network intrusion. He claims you stood by, offering only procedural complaints, while the situation worsened. How will you respond? Murphy wasn't looking at the committee. He was staring at the holographic display, which was currently dark. My response is a demonstration, Captain, he said. Lieutenant Collins, please download the incident dataset. Full packet stream. Run it at 1/10 speed. Collins, receiving the signal, typed in a command. The holographic display flickered to life. It displayed the same constellation of friendly blue icons, then the first hint of red. A single data packet, malicious, appeared. The Admiral's next-generation shield system is designed for speed and automation, Murphy began, his voice the calm, clear tones of a lecturer. Its primary defense is a firewall that isolates and destroys any code that doesn't match a known friendly signature. Watch. The red packet was detected on the display. A yellow isolation field appeared around it. Then, in accordance with Lansale's description of his system's aggressive defenses, a destroy command was issued. The red packet was vaporized. Is the system working? Admiral Lansale muttered from his seat, crossing his arms. No, Admiral, Murphy countered, his voice remaining level. The system was tricked. The hostile code was designed for sacrifice. The kill command, which is a high-priority system-wide broadcast, was the actual trigger for the attack. He pointed at Collins. Increase the kill command broadcast, Lieutenant. Show them the hex payload. The display enlarged. The kill signal, which should have been a pure string of code, had a tiny, almost invisible parasite. A data subpacket, encrypted and dormant. The malicious code wasn't trying to get through the wall, Murphy explained. It forced the wall to open a gate for it. Our own defense system became the propagation method. Every time we tried to kill the infection, we were effectively broadcasting the virus to a new set of nodes. The polymorphic nature of the attack wasn't in the virus itself. It was in how it exploited our own frequency-hopping authentication protocols to change its signature after each broadcast. We were fighting ourselves. A murmur passed through the room. The commission members leaned forward, their expressions changing from judicial sternness to intense interest. Admiral Lansale's face froze. "It's a theory, Commander," he said, his voice tight. "A posthumous fantasy. You didn't see it at the time. You didn't do anything." "That's incorrect, Admiral," Murphy said, his gaze finally locking on him. "I didn't act because any action available to standard operators would have accelerated the cascade. The only solution was not to fight the code in the network, but to override the network itself." "Lieutenant, run the simulation forward." Real speed. The display exploded in a chaos of red. Blue icons flickered and died. It was a perfect reconstruction of the crash. "This is the moment of total system failure," Murphy announced. "The point where Admiral Lansale claims I was paralyzed. My inactivity lasted exactly 12 seconds. He approached the console himself. His fingers moved across the holographic interface, not in a frantic rush, but with slow, deliberate precision. It wasn't typing. It was more like he was conducting an orchestra. The malicious code uses the system's main clock loop to synchronize its jumps. The solution is not to block the jumps, but to introduce a recursive delay into the time synchronization protocol itself. You create a feedback loop. Something incredible happened on the screen. It didn't attack the red icons. Instead, it introduced a new element, a shimmering, ghostly layer of data that overlaid the entire network. "I'm desynchronizing the network from its own heartbeat," he said, his voice a low whisper. "The hostile code is now chasing the ghost. It's trying to jump to a frequency that existed 2 milliseconds ago." The swarm of red icons began to waver. They began to tremble, losing coherence. They were designed to mimic a healthy, synchronized system. He had made the system unhealthy in a very specific, controlled way. Now that they are isolated and confused, they can be collected. He concluded with a final, precise gesture. He drew a containment field not around individual red icons, but around the entire phantom network layer. The red icons, now unable to communicate or reproduce, simply vanished, purged from the system, their predictable paths leading to dead ends. The holographic display stabilized. The blue icons reappeared, solid and stable. The entire process, from his first touch to the final clear, took 9 seconds. Silence. A profound, absolute silence filled the wargame simulation room. The 3 commission captains stared at the now perfect tactical display, their mouths slightly open. Lieutenant Collins looked as if he'd just witnessed a miracle. Captain Evans in the background allowed himself a small, restrained smile. Admiral Lansale sat as if turned to stone. He watched as his entire accusation, his entire narrative of her incompetence, was dismantled and vaporized with the same surgical precision Murphy had used on the hostile code. He'd accused him of freezing, and yet he just demonstrated a level of understanding and control over Lansale's own prize system that was galaxies beyond his own. Captain Jennings spoke first, his voice hoarse with awe. "Commander, where did you learn to do this?" Murphy stepped back from the console, his posture returning to neutral. His job was done. "In a different context, Captain," he said. "The principles are the same." The turnaround was complete. It was a single, unquestionable act of supreme competence. The balance of power in the room hadn't simply shifted. It had been inverted. The expressions on the commission members' faces were no longer accusatory. They were puzzled, deeply impressed, and beginning to be very, very curious. They were no longer investigating a junior officer's failure. They were beginning to suspect they had stumbled into the middle of something far more complex. The Admiral's charge of negligence now looked absurd, and his public rage, in retrospect, looked like the panicked rage of a man who knew he was in deep water. The room was quieter, the culture within its 4 walls already shifting. The question was no longer whether Commander Murphy was competent. The question was, who was he? The inquiry committee reconvened 2 days later, but its purpose had changed radically. This was no longer an Article 32 hearing against Commander Murphy. It was now an investigation into the facts surrounding the procurement of the Advanced Generation Shield System and the events leading to the network failure. Admiral Lansale was no longer a prosecutor. He was a witness, and a deeply inconvenient one at that. Captain Evans, armed with Murphy's demonstration, formally requested an expanded investigation. He also confidentially submitted Murphy's report on the torn uniform, complete with a timestamp and security camera footage. The agency's gears, slowly but powerfully, began to turn in a new direction. The hearing room was a formal, wood-paneled space, a sharp contrast to the cool glow of the operations center. 3 captains sat at a raised table. Murphy and Captain Evans sat at one table, Admiral Lansale at another, accompanied by the naval advocate's lawyer, who looked increasingly tense. "Admiral Lansale," Captain Jennings began, his tone now clipped and procedural. "This committee has reviewed Commander Murphy's technical demonstration. We have also reviewed the report he filed on May 14 of this year, 2 months before the incident. In that report, he describes, with remarkable foresight, the exact vulnerability that was exploited. Can you tell this committee why you dismissed his warnings and accelerated the system to full operational status?" Lansale, his face pale, cleared his throat. The commander's report was dense and theoretical. He projected a threat vector that our industry partners assured us was statistically insignificant. We had a schedule. The fleet needed this update. "So you prioritized the schedule over a security alert from your senior signals intelligence officer?" Jennings pressed. "I made my decision based on the information available," Lansale said firmly. "The data was available, Admiral. You chose to ignore it," Jennings retorted, his voice like ice. He held up the datapad. "We were also notified of an incident in the operations center where you physically assaulted Commander Murphy and damaged his uniform. Is that correct?" Lansale's jaw clenched. I was adamant. The pressure of the situation was enormous. Perhaps I was too zealous. "You ripped his sleeve, Admiral," Jennings said curtly. "This goes beyond zeal. This is assault. And it appears to have uncovered something that has sparked a great deal of investigation." He pointed to a side door. It opened, and an elderly, wiry man in the crisp uniform of a chief petty officer commanding entered. His face was a roadmap of deployments, his eyes sharp and knowing. The insignia of the Chief Petty Officer of the Cyber Command Fleet was visible on his collar. "Chief Petty Officer Torres," Jennings said. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat." Chief Petty Officer Torres nodded to the committee, his gaze sweeping around the room. He lingered for a moment on Murphy, a deep, profound respect flickering in his eyes. "Chief Petty Officer Torres," Jennings continued. "You've served for 35 years, many of them in the special operations and intelligence communities. We've asked you here to consult on an identification matter." He passed the tablet across the table to Torres. On the screen was a clean graphic image of the artist's work, a phoenix with a broken antenna. "Fides in antennas." Torres glanced at the image, though he barely needed to. A slow, knowing sigh escaped him. He looked up, not at the committee, but at Admiral Lansale. "There are some things in this fleet, sir, that aren't talked about," Torres began, his voice a low, thunderous rumble. The sound of institutional memory. "There are projects and units that exist in the shadows because their work is so critical and so dangerous that they need to be ghosts. These are the people who go into the darkness to make sure everyone else has the light." He tapped the tablet. "In the late 1990s, during the digital transition, we were losing the battle of electronic warfare. Badly. Our adversaries were faster, more creative. So a program was created. It was called Project Trident. It wasn't about building better equipment. It was about finding the best minds. They recruited a handful of people, mostly prodigies, from within and outside the service. Mathematicians, hackers, linguists, signals analysts. People who thought not like soldiers, but like the enemy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. They had no base. They had no uniform in the traditional sense. They were a ghost unit. They were inserted, digitally or physically, into our worst command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence problems. They hacked our own systems, found flaws, and rebuilt them from the inside, making them stronger than before. Their training was legendary. It was said they could bring down an entire carrier group's network with a satellite phone and a laptop, and then restore it before the coffee was cold. Their operational name was Team Phoenix. Admiral Lansale now stared at Murphy, his face a picture of horror. a quiet, procedural officer, a tick-box commander. "It's their emblem," Torres said, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "The Phoenix, because they brought systems back from the dead. The broken antenna, because they believed the only safe system was the one you'd already broken. Fides in antennas. Faith in antennas. It was a twist on the old Special Forces motto. They didn't just have faith in the darkness. They had faith in the signals themselves, the very spectrum that others saw as chaos. "This unit," Captain Jennings began to stutter. "If it's so secret." "It was officially disbanded in 2010, Torres said. "Or at least that's the public record. The truth is, Project Trident was too valuable to let go. Its members were purged. They were given clean, sterile service records and integrated back into the regular force. They were placed in key positions, their pasts sealed at the highest levels of the Office of Naval Intelligence. They serve as a silent internal immune system. They watch, they listen, they identify threats long before people like Admiral Lansale see them on the big screen. They file reports, and they hope someone is wise enough to read them." The revelation hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Murphy wasn't just right. He'd acted exactly as he'd been trained. His calm wasn't paralysis. It was the practical discipline of a specialist who'd seen the whole problem from start to finish, while everyone else was reacting to an explosion. His report wasn't a cover-your-ass memo. It was a ghostly warning. Commander Jacob Murphy's story didn't end with the court-martial and public revelation of Admiral Victor Lansale. On the contrary, it was only just beginning, as if a long, lingering rain were opening a new, strange chapter in his service and life. The days following the ceremony were filled with a sense of either relief or anxiety. Word of the former, quiet officer, who had instantly upended the entire naval order, quickly spread throughout the Pearson Bay base and far beyond. Some avoided him, respectfully backing away in the corridors. Others, on the contrary, tried to invite him for coffee, to exchange a few words, perhaps hoping to touch this new symbol of competence. Murphy himself accepted everything with the same calm, ironic detachment that had once irritated him and now evoked open envy. One evening, as the ship rocked gently at the pier, an old colleague of Murphy's, Major Thomas Greenfield, a veteran of Operation Sigma, the very same operation that had birthed Project Phoenix, approached him. Greenfield sat silently next to him on the concrete parapet, gazed out at the sea for a long moment, and then, with a sly grin, said, "You know, Jacob, there's one admiral here who's lost his head because of his paranoia." He winked ironically, raising the flask to his lips. "But come to think of it, thanks to you, they've finally started listening to those who think, not shout." "Progress is always accompanied by hysteria," Murphy remarked dryly, sighing. "People are afraid of anything that goes beyond their usual framework, especially if it doesn't fit into their instructions. Or if it's a phoenix tattoo," Greenfield chuckled, lowering his voice. "Do you think there'll be a ghost cult in the Navy now?" Murphy allowed himself a slight smile for the first time that day. "No, rather, the cult of documentation and new rules for handling sleeves. Old school." Greenfield clapped him on the shoulder. "Get better. You'll get promoted to captain, and then, who knows, someone else might get fired for not reading reports." "I won't live to be captain, Tom," Jacob shook his head. "Not in this world. Here, people cling to their rank plates more tightly than their own sleepers." "Would you become an admiral?" "Only if I could leave a clause in the orders. From now on, think for yourself." At this point, Lieutenant Collins intervened, his voice now more confident. "Commander, is it true that you are planning to retire to civilian life?" Murphy looked at him carefully, thought for a moment, and then said, "And if I tell you that now my papers interest you more than your career, will you believe me?" Collins chuckled. "After this week, I believe in anything. If you want, you can lead the training. Just make sure you record everything in detail for posterity. We'll now have to take our exams based on your reports, not Lansale's instructions." Greenfield couldn't resist. "Hey, Jacob, maybe your ghost school really will become the new doctrine, so that now everyone is on edge, ready to see the signal in the noise, and mend their sleeves after any storm." "The main thing," Murphy concluded with a grin, "is that after every scandal, You're left with a needle, a little nerve of steel, and, yes, a couple of new friends who aren't afraid to say, something's wrong here. And so, amidst the daily changes, in the transitional dawns and dusks, a completely different culture began to emerge. One where checkboxes were replaced by real decisions and emotional maturity achieved wild glory, no less confidently than someone habitually imposed hysterical orders. Someone will write a story about a quiet officer who turned the entire system upside down. But for Jacob Murphy himself, it was just another task. Eliminate distractions, maintain order, and if possible, leave behind a little more clarity than before his arrival.